They thought I was just another dumb ranch hand who'd work for scraps and be grateful for it. I fed their cattle every single day while they paid me less than minimum wage and laughed about it over expensive steaks. But I learned something they never considered. I was paying attention. And patience, it turns out, is the sharpest knife you can hold against someone's throat. The Wilson Ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of Montana prairie, and I started working there when I was 22 years old. Fresh out of a failed attempt at college and desperate for any work I could find, I took the job feeding their massive herd of beef cattle. The Wilsons, Jackson and his brother Marcus, inherited the ranch from their father, and they ran it like kings ruling over peasants. They paid me $8 an hour when the job was worth at least $15, and they knew it. Every morning before dawn, I'd load 50-pound bags of feed onto the truck, drive out to the pastures, and distribute it across multiple feeding stations. My back ached constantly. My hands developed calluses on top of calluses. The Wilsons would drive past in their brand-new F-350 trucks, windows rolled up, air conditioning blasting, barely acknowledging my existence with a dismissive wave. During my lunch breaks, I'd sit in my beat-up Toyota, eating gas station sandwiches while they drove into town for ribeyes and whiskey at the steakhouse. I watched them throw money around like it meant nothing, all while I counted pennies to make rent in a trailer that leaked when it rained. But I wasn't just angry. I was curious. Where did they get their feed? How much did they spend? What were their profit margins? I started asking questions, listening carefully, keeping mental notes. The feed came from Prairie Gold Feed Company, a regional supplier located 2 hours away. The Wilsons spent roughly $30,000 monthly on cattle feed alone. The Wilsons weren't just cheap with wages. They were cheap with everything except their own luxuries. They'd negotiate aggressively with suppliers, threaten to switch companies, demand discounts, and then turn around and buy themselves new ATVs for weekend entertainment. I watched Marcus Wilson berate a delivery driver from Prairie Gold over a $2 discrepancy in an invoice, threatening to pull their entire account. The driver looked exhausted, humiliated, apologetic. I recognized that look because I wore it myself every day. One afternoon, Jackson Wilson called me into the ranch office. I stood there in my dirty work clothes while he sat behind his massive oak desk, boots up on the surface, hat tilted back. "We're cutting your hours," he announced casually, not even looking up from his phone. "Just need you 3 days a week now. Labor costs are too high." I felt my stomach drop. 3 days wouldn't cover my rent. "I can't survive on that," I said quietly. He finally looked at me, his expression completely indifferent. "Then find another job. Plenty of folks would take your spot." He waved his hand dismissively. "You're feeding cows, not performing brain surgery. Anyone can do it." I stood there silently, swallowing my rage, my humiliation, my desperation. "Understood," I said finally, turning to leave. "And don't let the door hit you on the way out," Marcus called after me, laughing at his own joke. That night, sitting in my cramped trailer with the heater barely working, I made a decision. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to yell or confront them. I was going to do something they'd never expect from someone they considered beneath them. I was going to change the game entirely. I started researching Prairie Gold Feed Company obsessively, spending my evenings on my laptop. Prairie Gold Feed Company turned out to be more vulnerable than I'd imagined. It was a family-owned business, third generation, struggling to compete with larger corporate feed suppliers. Their website looked like it hadn't been updated since 2005. Their customer base was shrinking. The owner, Gerald Hoffman, was approaching 70 and had no succession plan. His children had moved to cities and wanted nothing to do with the agricultural business. I found articles in local agricultural journals mentioning Prairie Gold's financial struggles. They'd taken out loans to upgrade equipment, but hadn't seen the return on investment they'd hoped for. Revenue was declining year over year. They were surviving barely on their existing contracts with ranches like the Wilsons. This was it. This was my opening. But I needed capital, and I had almost nothing. I took on 2 additional jobs. I worked overnight stocking shelves at a grocery store. I picked up weekend shifts doing landscaping work. I ate nothing but rice, beans, and whatever cheap protein I could find. I canceled my internet, got rid of cable, stopped going anywhere that cost money. Every single dollar went into savings. The Wilsons noticed my exhaustion but interpreted it as laziness. "You look like hell," Jackson said one morning. "Maybe if you worked harder here, you wouldn't need other jobs." I nodded silently and kept working. 3 days a week at their ranch, barely making enough to survive, while they continued living like kings off the labor of people like me. After 8 months of brutal saving, I had $11,000. Not nearly enough to buy a company, but enough to start having conversations. I drove to Prairie Gold's headquarters on my day off. Gerald Hoffman's office smelled like coffee and old paper. He looked tired, weathered by decades of hard work in a dying industry. I sat across from him in my cleanest work clothes, hat in my hands, and told him the truth. "I work for one of your biggest clients, the Wilson Ranch. I know they spend about $30,000 a month with you, and I want to buy your company." He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed. Not mockingly, but with genuine surprise. "Son, this company is worth about $800,000, even in its current state. You got that kind of money?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I have a plan, and I have something you need: time and energy. You're tired. Your kids don't want this business, but I do. And I understand this industry from the ground up, literally. I've been loading your feed bags onto trucks for years." Gerald leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "Why would a ranch hand want to own a feed company?" I met his eyes. "Because the people I work for treat people like you and me as disposable. They negotiate in bad faith, threaten constantly, and squeeze every penny while spending fortunes on themselves. I'm tired of it. And I think we could build something better." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me your plan." We talked for 3 hours. I proposed a partnership structure where I'd work for the company while gradually buying equity over 5 years, with Gerald staying on as an advisor. I'd bring my labor, my knowledge of customers, my willingness to work brutal hours. He'd provide mentorship, industry connections, and gradual ownership transfer. It was the craziest business deal I'd ever heard of, but somehow, impossibly, he agreed to it. The transition wasn't smooth. Gerald's lawyers thought he was insane. The bank was skeptical about lending to someone with my minimal credit history and limited capital. But Gerald vouched for me, and eventually, we structured a deal. I'd put down my $11,000 as earnest money, take out a small business loan for additional capital, and work as general manager while purchasing equity quarterly based on company performance. I kept working at the Wilson Ranch during this entire process, saying nothing about my plans. 3 days a week, I'd show up, feed their cattle with Prairie Gold feed, and endure their casual cruelty and condescension. The other 4 days, I'd work at Prairie Gold, learning every aspect of the business: procurement, logistics, customer service, accounting, quality control. Gerald taught me everything: how to negotiate with grain suppliers, how to balance nutritional formulas for different cattle types, how to maintain equipment, how to read financial statements, how to build relationships with ranchers who'd been customers for decades. "Most of these ranchers are good people," Gerald told me one afternoon. "They work hard, treat their workers fairly, pay their bills on time. But there are a few, like the Wilsons, who've made this business miserable. They think because they have money, they can treat everyone beneath them like servants." I understood that better than anyone. 6 months into my new role, I'd improved Prairie Gold's efficiency significantly. We upgraded our ordering system, streamlined delivery routes, improved our feed formulas, and started rebuilding relationships with customers who'd felt neglected. Revenue began stabilizing, then slowly growing. I worked 16-hour days, but every hour felt meaningful because I was building something mine. The Wilsons still had no idea. A full year into my partnership with Gerald, I'd purchased 25% equity in Prairie Gold Feed Company. The business was not just surviving, but beginning to thrive under new management. We'd added 3 new ranch accounts and improved our profit margins through better supplier negotiations and operational efficiency. Gerald was impressed and increasingly comfortable with his decision to bring me on. Meanwhile, at the Wilson Ranch, conditions had somehow gotten worse. They'd cut my hours again, now just 2 days a week. They'd hired cheaper labor for the other days, mostly undocumented workers they could pay even less and treat even worse. Jackson Wilson had bought himself a new boat, despite living in Montana where he'd use it maybe twice a year. One morning, Marcus Wilson stood by the feed truck inspecting my work with his usual critical sneer. "This feed quality has been inconsistent lately," he complained, kicking at a bag. "Tell Prairie Gold we're considering switching suppliers if they don't improve and lower their prices." I looked at him calmly. "I'll pass along your concerns." "You do that," he said dismissively, "and load this faster. We're not paying you to daydream." I smiled slightly, not enough for him to notice, but enough to feel the satisfaction building inside me. Soon, very soon. 3 months later, Gerald officially retired, selling me his remaining 75% equity through a structured payment plan I'd continue making over the next 4 years. At 32 years old, I became the sole owner of Prairie Gold Feed Company. I'd done it. The ranch hand, who'd been paid in scraps, now owned the company that supplied some of the largest ranches in Montana. My first official act as owner was reviewing our customer accounts. The Wilson Ranch was, predictably, our 3rd largest client. I scheduled a routine business review with all major accounts, the Wilsons included. The meeting would take place at Prairie Gold headquarters, a standard practice for discussing contracts, pricing, and service terms. I sent professional letters to each ranch owner, including Jackson and Marcus Wilson, requesting their presence for what I described as an important discussion about our continued partnership. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, wearing the nicest clothes I owned, still modest by their standards, but clean and professional. I'd prepared thoroughly, reviewing every detail of their account, delivery schedules, payment history, complaints, special requests, discounts we'd granted over the years. Jackson and Marcus Wilson walked in 20 minutes late, as usual, dressed in expensive Western wear, talking loudly about a hunting trip they'd just returned from. They barely glanced at me as they sat down. "Where's Hoffman?" Jackson demanded, looking around. "We don't have time to waste with some assistant." I leaned forward slightly, hands folded on the conference table. "Gerald retired 3 months ago. I'm the new owner of Prairie Gold Feed Company." The recognition didn't come immediately. They stared at me, confused, like they were trying to place my face in a context that made sense to them. Then slowly, Marcus's eyes widened. "Wait, aren't you the guy who feeds our cattle?" "Used to," I corrected calmly. "I worked at your ranch for nearly 3 years. Now I own this company." The silence in that room was beautiful. Absolute, stunned, disbelieving silence. Jackson's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, barely concealed rage. "This is some kind of joke," he said flatly. "No joke," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. "This is your account history. You've been a customer of Prairie Gold for 14 years. Marcus grabbed the folder, flipping through it roughly. "How the hell does a ranch hand afford to buy a feed company?" "Hard work, smart planning, and an owner willing to take a chance on someone with actual knowledge of this industry," I replied evenly. "Gerald Hoffman and I built a partnership over the past 18 months while I continued working at your ranch. I bought the company in stages, and 3 months ago I became sole owner." Jackson leaned forward, his face flushed. "So what? You're here to gloat? To rub it in our faces that you got lucky?" "I'm here to discuss your account terms," I said calmly. "Prairie Gold values all our long-standing customers. However, we're implementing new pricing structures and service standards going forward. We're no longer offering the below-market rates you've been receiving." Our prices will increase 15% effective next month, bringing them in line with what we charge other ranches of comparable size. 15%? Marcus nearly shouted. That's outrageous. We'll switch suppliers. I nodded slowly. That's certainly your right. However, I should mention that our two closest competitors are already operating at capacity and charge approximately 20% more than our new rates. There's also a regional feed shortage anticipated for next quarter due to drought conditions affecting grain suppliers. We've secured sufficient inventory for our existing customers, but new clients will face significant delays and premium pricing. The implications settled over them like a heavy blanket. They needed us more than we needed them. The power dynamic had completely reversed, and they were only just beginning to understand it. Jackson's jaw clenched. You planned this. This whole thing was some kind of revenge scheme. No, I said honestly. This was survival that turned into opportunity. You paid me poverty wages for backbreaking work. I found a way to build something better. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. We gave you a job when you had nothing. And this is how you repay us? I felt the anger I'd suppressed for years rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. You gave me a job that paid $8 an hour for work worth $15. You cut my hours twice, forcing me to work 3 jobs simultaneously just to afford rent in a trailer that leaked. You mocked me, dismissed me, and treated me like I was disposable. You didn't give me anything except the motivation to ensure I'd never be powerless again. The room went silent. Jackson's face was bright red now, veins visible on his neck. Marcus looked like he wanted to flip the table. But underneath their anger, I saw something else. Fear. They'd built their operation on exploiting people and squeezing suppliers, and now someone they'd exploited owned something they desperately needed. So what now? Jackson asked through clenched teeth. You're just going to bleed us dry? Jack up prices until we can't afford to operate? No, I said firmly. I'm going to charge you fair market rates, provide excellent service, and expect timely payment and professional conduct. That's it. This isn't revenge. It's business. But it's business where you don't get to treat people like garbage anymore and expect them to smile about it. I slid a contract across the table. These are the new terms. You have 2 weeks to review and decide. If you'd like to remain a Prairie Gold customer, sign the agreement. If not, I wish you the best in finding alternative suppliers. They left without signing, their expensive boots echoing angrily down the hallway. I sat in the conference room afterward, heart pounding, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. It wasn't the triumphant moment I'd imagined, but it was satisfying. The Wilsons spent the next week trying to find alternative feed suppliers. I knew this because several of my industry contacts mentioned receiving frantic calls from them. Every supplier they contacted either charged more than my new rates, couldn't accommodate their volume requirements, or wasn't interested in working with clients known for being difficult and demanding special treatment. They had no choice but to return. 10 days after our meeting, I received a signed contract via email. No phone call, no meeting, just the digital signature. They'd agreed to my terms. I restructured their delivery schedule to be more efficient for our operations rather than their convenience. I assigned them a professional but firm account manager who wouldn't tolerate the abusive behavior they'd shown previous Prairie Gold staff. And I made sure every invoice was detailed, accurate, and sent precisely on time with clear payment expectations. They paid every invoice promptly. They stopped calling with nitpicky complaints. They became, essentially, just another customer. No special treatment, no bullying privileges, nothing but a standard business relationship based on fair exchange of value. Meanwhile, Prairie Gold Feed Company continued growing. I hired 3 new employees, including 2 former ranch hands I'd known from other operations who'd been similarly underpaid and undervalued. I paid them well above industry standard, provided health insurance, and created a workplace culture based on respect and shared success. Word spread, and talented people wanted to work for us. Within 18 months of taking full ownership, I'd increased Prairie Gold's revenue by 40%, expanded our service territory, and built a reputation as both the best feed supplier and the best employer in the region. I drove past the Wilson Ranch occasionally, seeing their operation continuing as always, still exploiting workers, still chasing profits. 3 years after that confrontation in my conference room, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Marcus Wilson. His voice was different, quieter, less arrogant. "I need to talk to you," he said, "in person, if you're willing." We met at a diner halfway between Prairie Gold headquarters and the Wilson Ranch. He looked older, tired in a way that wasn't just physical. We sat across from each other in a worn vinyl booth, coffee cups between us. "Our operation is failing," he said bluntly. "We've been bleeding money for 2 years. Labor costs keep rising because we can't keep good workers. Equipment keeps breaking down because we've deferred maintenance too long. We're facing a lawsuit from former employees over wage violations, and beef prices have dropped while our costs have gone up." I listened silently, sipping my coffee. "You were right," he continued, the words clearly difficult for him. "We built everything on being cheap. Cheap labor, cheap deals, cheap shortcuts. And it worked for a while until it didn't. Meanwhile, you built something sustainable. Something people want to be part of." I set down my coffee cup. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm trying to sell the ranch, and it's worth less than half what my father paid for it. Because my brother and I haven't spoken in 6 months, because we're fighting over money neither of us has. Because I'm 47 years old and realizing I've wasted most of my life being the kind of person people hate." He looked directly at me for the first time. "I'm not asking for your pity or your help. I just wanted you to know that you taught me something, even though it took me years to learn it. Treating people like they're disposable eventually makes your entire operation disposable." I studied him for a long moment. He looked genuinely defeated, genuinely regretful. "I appreciate you telling me this," I said finally. "And I hope you figure out your situation. But I'm not going to pretend those years you underpaid me and treated me like garbage didn't matter. They shaped everything that came after." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand. I just wanted you to hear it from me directly. I was wrong. We were wrong, and you deserved better." We finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence. As we left, he extended his hand. I shook it. Not as forgiveness, exactly, but as acknowledgement. People can change, even if it takes losing everything to start. 6 months later, the Wilson Ranch sold to a corporate agricultural company that immediately restructured the entire operation. Jackson and Marcus Wilson left Montana, from what I heard. I never saw them again. Prairie Gold Feed Company continued thriving. I maintained the principles Gerald Hoffman taught me and the lessons I'd learned from years of being undervalued. Pay people fairly, treat them with respect, build relationships based on mutual benefit, and never forget where you came from. I hired Sarah Martinez, a young woman who'd been working minimum wage at a feed store, as my operations manager. She reminded me of myself at that age. Hungry, intelligent, underestimated. Within 2 years, she was the best operations manager in the region. I created a profit-sharing program for all employees. I funded scholarships for children of ranch workers pursuing agricultural education. The ranch hand who'd been paid in scraps had built something that mattered. Not just a successful company, but a model for how people in this industry could treat each other better. Every time I visited a ranch and saw workers being treated with dignity, earning living wages, I felt that vindication all over again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been quite a journey from loading feed bags before dawn for poverty wages to owning the company that supplies ranches across Montana. The satisfaction isn't just in the business success, but in proving that the people who get treated as disposable and forgettable are often the ones paying the closest attention. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening to this story from? What's your experience been with standing up for yourself in difficult work situations? Have you ever turned a bad situation into an opportunity for something better? Your stories and perspectives mean a lot, and I read every comment. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more narratives about people overcoming adversity, fighting back against injustice, and building something meaningful from nothing, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories, and I've got many more to tell. Whether you're currently in a situation where you feel undervalued, or you're on the other side of it now looking back, remember this: patience, attention, and hard work can change everything. The people who underestimate you are often giving you the greatest advantage you could ask for. Thank you again for being here. Until next time.